in the world of Lyme disease, there's been a long worldwide strategy to deny Lyme disease. And this is not magic. It's just carefully crafted strategies and tactics. I've identified 6 tactics that are being used to minimize the importance of Lyme disease. And number 1 is to say that it's rare and not serious and attack those who say otherwise. Here's a quote from a paper: "The infection is non-fatal, non-communicable from person to person, is responsive to antibiotics, and is limited in range both geographically and seasonally." And that's Orwater, Back and Dotweiler et al. In a paper published in The Lancet in this country. Another quote: "People who have had Lyme disease rarely develop chronic problems, experts have said." That's Harvey in the British Medical Journal. "All infectious disease specialists must counter the breakthrough of these violent and even mafia groups." That's Gentilini. Another method is to underreport positive cases. In the UK, clinician-reported cases, that's doctors who sent in a report that their patient had Lyme disease, were excluded from reported data from 2012 onwards. It was called enhanced surveillance. Counting Lyme disease cases is not a priority. Our resources are focusing on prevention. That's the head of the Centers for Disease Control, Paul Mead, speaking in 2004. Recession of 2008 resulted in major layoffs for government agencies, including those collecting and reporting Lyme disease cases. Method number 3 is to use poor and insensitive tests and methods. The average sensitivity of commercial test kits with known positive samples is 59% and has not improved in 20 years. That's a paper I published with Professor Curry. The 2-tier positive test, and a positive ELISA followed by a positive immune blot, is required by the UK NICE guidelines and 9 other agencies around the world, and it generates up to 500 times more false negative results than 2-stage HIV testing. The use of inappropriate and unvalidated tests, process modifications. In one laboratory, incubation times were changed, calibration and recording charts were not used, and there were quality control failures. This was highlighted in a report working with two patients and Chris Bowles in a report to the Parliamentary and Health Services Ombudsman. All of the claims were agreed with, although no action was taken. Another thing is to modify the interpretation of test results. And positive results are being discounted as evidence of infection, active infection.
I just thought I'd go out there just because it was
Fourth method, divide the disease into acute and chronic. No cases of chronic Lyme disease were seen. That's Dylan O'Connell and Wright in the Clinical Medicines Journal. Chronic Lyme disease is non-specific, without consistent definition, that is given to patients with various symptoms. Treatments offered for chronic Lyme disease, such as prolonged antibiotic or immunoglobulin therapy, lack data supporting effectiveness and are not recommended. That's Marzek, Nelson et al. And that's in the Centers for Disease Control weekly report. Also in this dividing into acute and chronic, our patients who all attributed their symptoms to chronic Lyme disease were heterogeneous. None had evidence of persistent Borrelia infection. 48% had presence of anti-Borrelia antibodies. The patients had more fatigue and poorer health-related quality of life as compared to normative data. Magland. And then obviously they have invented, the members of the IDSA, Escapor and others, have invented the term post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome. And as I say, it is not an active disease and there's nothing to treat. It's all in people's heads. The Lyme disease controversy keeps on getting bigger with the hypothetical presentation of chronic Lyme disease. This is Gentilini again. The fact there is insufficient progress over more than 3 decades in understanding what is as much a psychosocial and cultural phenomenon as a biological one. That's Barber in 2016. Chronic Lyme disease lacks an accepted clinical definition, and most patients who receive this diagnosis have other illnesses. Strategy number 5 for neuroborreliosis diagnosis. It requires an invasive cerebrospinal fluid tap and an unvalidated what's called intrathecal test. Who requires this test? Well, France, USA, 2 authorities in the UK, Switzerland, Germany, and 2 authorities require it. In Europe, Skibor, Poland, and Belgium. What is this intrathecal test? The results, data is put into a program. Here's an example from Viromed. It takes blood chemistry, albumin levels and IgG levels and so forth, and then with some magic calculations, it calculates the amount of dilution required for the cerebrospinal fluid compared to the serum. So they take all the serum IgG, IgM responses, and then they take the serum, the cerebrospinal fluid, and they dilute it according to the calculation. And then, based upon the levels that are then shown by the computer program, you look upon these charts and find the location where the cerebrospinal fluid IgG levels or IgM levels are 20% higher than in serum. The method, and of course that is, there's, to the best of my knowledge, no laboratories anywhere in the world are carrying out that test. It was developed by Hans Otto Reber, and I don't think he supports that type of test anymore. So in other words, to have a diagnosis of neuroborreliosis, you must have that test done. Finally, a good way to make the disease disappear is to eliminate it from EU disease surveillance. And this is a commission decision in 2018. It highlights 57 diseases that will be monitored and surveillance carried out in every country of the EU. It's an updated list, 57 diseases, Chronk, dengue, Zika. This is the full list. Anthrax, botulism, and so forth, hepatitis B, C, all the way down to Zika virus and congenital Zika virus. You'll notice there's no such thing as Lyme disease. Lyme disease, there'll be no surveillance for Lyme disease in any European country. There is surveillance for Lyme borreliosis, however, again, that will require that the test I just mentioned. So, sorry, Lyme moment. This is the definition, and so to confirm a case, there must be phagocytosis of spinal fluid and evidence of intrathecal production of Lyme borreliosis, which is that test I mentioned, or culture of Borrelia species, or nucleic acid detection in spinal fluid. If it's not Lyme disease, then what diseases are people diagnosed? And these are some examples from a survey done by Kate Bloor in 2012, a patient survey. And these were patients who had finally received a Lyme disease diagnosis based upon testing and symptoms. And they reported these diseases that they had originally been diagnosed with: depression, old age and obesity, West Nile fever, Bell's palsy, fibromyalgia, etc., etc. And so Lyme disease has disappeared.